next panel, which is all about the changing nature of work. And it's going to be led by Michele Siekerka, who is the president of the New Jersey Business and Industry Association. And Michele, I'll turn it over to you and let you introduce the panelists.
Great, thanks so much. Wow, this has just been really inspiring so far. I'm enjoying the discussion, enjoyed all the interaction last night. And now we're going to talk about something regardless of how you feel about it. I think we can all agree that over the last few years, we felt a definite shift and change in how we do work, the where, the how, the why, etc. And we have many opinions about it. There's a lot written on it, but I think that we can all agree that this is dynamic space, continuous change, constant momentum and movement. And I don't think anybody has a silver bullet on what the changing nature of work and what it means for the future on how, where, and why we do work is going to mean for each and every one of us. So I'm really excited this morning to be joined by a great panel of speakers. We connected the other day just to talk about what our questions and discussion might be about for today. And it was like a living room couch discussion. And that's what we want to accomplish this morning. We're going to take our time to introduce each of our speakers, one in order. I'm going to pose a couple of questions to create somewhat of a provocative discussion around this issue, but we want it to be interactive, and I'm going to keep my eye on the chat. So if folks have questions and want to wage in, by all means, please do so. So with that, I'm going to first ask Niki to introduce herself. Niki, would you introduce yourself to the audience this morning?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. My name is Niki. I graduated from NYU in 2020. I'm now a product strategist at Moody's Analytics. And just like a little fun fact, I'm a big coffee snob. So if anyone else is, I'll put that in the chat too.
Thanks, Niki. Melanie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, Melanie Franco. I am the Director of Technical Training at Atlantic Health System, also a social media influencer. And I'm so excited to be here today on this panel, so thank you so much. And in my spare time, I volunteer on a farm with sheep, and I'm very, very interested in solar panel grazing. That's what I do, volunteer, so nice to meet you.
Nice, interesting. Thanks, Melanie. And Gale, please introduce yourself.
Yes, hi everyone, I'm Gale Tenen Spak. I am currently principal consultant of Bridge Their Future, but for 27 years, I led continuing professional and distance learning at NJIT. Very interested in workforce changes, women in the workforce, and of course, since NJIT is a STEM university, women in technology. Hi, everyone again.
Thanks so much, Gale. We're going to dig in a little bit into that research in a few minutes, but let's just step back for a moment. Obviously, we can recognize that with COVID came a lot of change. We all went home for what we thought was a week or 2 weeks, 3 years later to still be saying, when and how and where did we end up with this? And we're maneuvering our way through. And, I like to call it COVID keepers. There were some things we learned during COVID that we shouldn't be getting rid of because we learned different ways to enable and to empower. And to hold ourselves accountable and to be productive, right? And we want to marry those best practices of the last couple of years with some of the best practices we had before. The intersection of how do we engage like we did last night in 3D real time, right? Where we truly shake a hand, where we have the opportunity to be 3D and talk to each other one-on-one, where we get to whiteboard and brainstorm and bring energy and momentum into a room where you can actually feel the roof popping off, right? And then how do you take that and how do you marry that into this one-dimensional world where we've become very productive, very efficient, and frankly, who wants to drive 3 hours across the state when I can hop on a Zoom and have the same meeting and yet recognize I'm giving up something, but maybe I'm gaining something else. So we want to marry together the best practices of both. The opportunity of being together, right? That opportunity for synergy and connectivity and communication and visibility. We're going to talk specifically about visibility because I know Melanie has some thoughts on that, right? But then this whole idea of how do we capture the momentum of those COVID keepers, the things we learned about productivity in the one-dimension world of communication that we call Zoom or Teams or whatever it might be. So to get us started, Gale, you did just reference some research Why don't you share with us some of the research? And this is also going to take into consideration not just the last couple of years, but keep in mind, leading up to COVID, the whole world was changing already on workforce because multi-generational individuals in the workforce. And what that means by way of how we communicate, perception, interaction, and what we all bring to a table. And, when Chaya started today, this focus on inclusion, wow, inclusion totally talks to multi-generational. So Gale, share a little bit of the research with us and we'll go from there.
Sure, happy to. Well, I do want this. So this is such a big subject. So I think one frame to look at it through is the 5 generations of work, because that's what we have. It started to certainly happen before COVID and during COVID, even more so. And it really, I think, will help to explain some of the things we're going to be talking about during COVID, where I'd like to talk about and think about that time period as hub and home or hybrid work. So hub or home. All right, so just lots of stuff to say. I'm going to do a very high level summary and kind of give a little bit about where women sit into this as opposed to men in the workforce. So I think many of you may know that it's pretty typical now that there's talk about 5 generations at work. A traditionalist born between 1925 and 1940, baby boomers, that's me, 1946 to 1964, Generation X, 1985 to 1980. I'm reading something here to get it right. Millennials, 1981 to 2009, and Generation Z goes by many names, neo-millennials, I-millennials, but let's call them Generation Z, current. So the biggest bulk of the population working today is Generation X. The mid-managers now maybe becoming much higher. According to 2020 data, only 5% of the entire population is in Generation Z or I generation or millennials. But let me give you a little bit of difference between attitudes, which I think really do reflect on what we're hearing about productivity at work, whether it be hub and home, 100% work, 100% Zoom, or whatever. So traditionalists, the older people, they are known to be dependable, straightforward, tactful, and loyal. And I won't go into how these traits were formed. That has to do not just with their family of origin, but of things happening in their environment as they were growing up. That's the key thing, not adult things, but as they were growing up. So their worldview, their communication style, their motivation, I think it's really interesting to talk about. The older folks in our society, traditionalists, are really motivated by respect. These are key things for the relationship and the trust that gets built in teams and employers and their leaders. Motivated by respect, recognition, providing long-term value to the company. Their communication style is personal touch. That's hard in the hybrid side of things. Handwritten notes instead of email. That's true still. And their worldview, obedience over individualism. Age equates with seniority. They feel they deserve respect, and they will advance to a hierarchy. The next, the baby boomers, describes me well, optimistic, competitive, workaholic, oh my God, yes, team-oriented, motivated by company loyalty, teamwork, and duty. My communication style, well, I'm gonna be a little different on this one, but whatever is most efficient, including phone calls and face-to-face. And worldview, achievement comes after paying one's dues, including sacrificing for success. And there's some tips in each of these that we can talk about later about what a leader might do to reflect onto these different styles. Moving on to The biggest bulk, Generation X, they are flexible, informal, skeptical, independent. They are motivated by diversity, work-life balance, their personal, professional interests rather than the company's interest. Communication style, whatever is most efficient, including still phone calls and face-to-face and worldview. Favoring diversity, quick to move on if their employer fails to meet their needs, resistance to change at work if it affects their personal lives. And that's somewhat we're seeing about, should we move back to full-time office once one is used to working from home? And let's go to millennials, competitive, civic and open-minded, achievement-oriented. They responsibility, the quality of their managers really motivates them. Unique work experiences, communication style, messaging, tweets, and email. Worldview, seeking challenging growth and development of fun work life and work-life balance, likely to leave an organization if they don't like the changes happening there. And finally, the youngest generation, Z, they are global, they are entrepreneurial, progressive, less focused. They are motivated by diversity, in my mind, a very good thing, personalization, individuality, creativity. Communication style is iMessages, tweets, social media, and their worldview, interesting. Self-identity as digital device addicts. Value independence and individuality, prefer to work with millennial managers, innovative coworkers, and new technologies. So I think that, I hope that frames a bit, but let me just, before giving the floor back to Michele, to really get discussion going, how this breaks down for women and men in our population. So I won't go into the actual data and the percentages, but I can tell you that the difference between well, we all know that women are like 50% of the population. We also all know, I hope on this webcast, that there are fewer women in tech than men, something we want to overcome through various programs, both in school, in college, and in the workplace. But the smallest differential of the number of women in the workplace versus men happens with the youngest. So that's a more even balance. Based on 2021 data, 68.6% of women, all women in America, are in the workforce versus still more, 73% of men. And the biggest gap between women in the workforce and men happened during the age group, baby boomers in a bit, 55 to 64, where a big spread, far fewer women in the workforce than men. And then it goes between there and then. But I think that sort of sets a frame, I hope. All right, back to you, Michele.
Yeah, fascinating. I mean, fascinating. And you see us all going like this, right? So whether or not you're hitting our particular generation, we're agreeing, or you're talking about someone who we know in that generation and agreeing, right?
Yeah.
Totally spot on. I already saw a comment. Someone said we would love to get this data. If there's a way for you to share this with us, maybe Chaya can send out. Maybe there are some slides somewhere, or the report perhaps would be.
Well, there's so many of them, but I will send one, the one I was reading from, but it matches everything else that I've seen. It was a nice summary.
would be fabulous. And I'll just say, so right within that, we can see inherent conflict could be possible.
Yes.
Based upon the how and where we work, right? And the to what end we work. And yet I do believe that there is a lot of observation to the fact that we want to have harmony in the workplace, a lot of training. Sure, you're going to have, some folks in certain generations say my way or the highway, but for the most part, I think we see a shifting dynamic in the workplace of wanting to understand what it takes. And I'll just say, as someone who represents business every day, I say to my companies each and every day, and those who run our businesses, if you do not lean into what the next generation workforce wants and needs, you're going to lose, because they're the workforce. And you need to find a way to harmonize how you think work gets done to how they want to do work in order to sustain for the future. Niki, I want to jump to you, because when we all met, you immediately jumped on the intergenerational and what you see from, your space as someone new to the workforce. So why don't you provide some observations and thoughts for us?
Absolutely. So, I mean, just for some context, growing up, I think, especially as like a child of immigrants and as first generation immigrant myself, I really fed into the like climbing the corporate ladder thing. And that was what I envisioned for myself, especially after graduating into a STEM career. However, because of the pandemic and sitting in my high school bedroom for graduation and the first 2 years of my career, I think that has changed significantly. So my personal definition of success in my career has definitely shifted, but also what I expect out of a workplace has shifted. I had the opportunity to be in a physical office when I was an intern in college. So I did get a sense of what a traditional work environment looked like and how communicating between different generations and perspectives was, but I felt like a lot of that formality caused red tape where it didn't need to be. So when we moved more into the completely remote and now in a hybrid workplace, I think I've continued that perspective of, if it doesn't need to be super formal, I'm not going to make it super formal, because we can get the work done without all of that tension for no reason. Like, I would rather just say what I'm feeling than cater to some sort of fake social boundary that might not translate globally either. So I think it's been very interesting working with I'm at my second job now, and how that's differed by my different managers that I've had. I work under a millennial manager now, and she's very blunt and sarcastic. And I think that has been working well. Whereas in my last job, if I said something a little too blunt, she probably wouldn't have been okay with it. But it's been very interesting navigating that. At least in my experience, when I work with people my age, we all feel very similarly. Of like, if we can just talk about it, we'll talk about it and we'll get it done. Whereas like I was on a call with the managing director today, and he's in his late 50s. There is that veil of, I need to be a little bit more serious and formal and calculated when I'm talking about things that I just talked about very casually with my manager like 20 minutes before that.
So managing yourself, right? Managing your own reaction and interaction to the person on the other side, which is significantly important. This is where I think if we could walk away with any type of best practice training in the workplace, regardless of if you're in an office or if you're in one dimensional like we are here, communication, right? How we communicate with the person on the other side, understanding how they like to be communicated to. That doesn't mean, stepping away from who you are as your authentic self, right? As we talked about last night. But the reality is acknowledging and recognizing that they're just built a little different than we are. And maybe our method of communication with them has to be a little different in order to get out of them what we need to get out of them and to give them what they need from us. Fair?
Very fair. And I'll say one more thing. I didn't realize that first 2 years out of college was going to be the hardest 2 years ever, because you are in forced community of peers for 4 years. And now it's not only you don't have that forced community of people who are like you, thinking like you, working like you, but now you have to adjust to 4 more generations of work styles, personal lives, and like priorities. Like my manager right now, she has 2 very young kids, and I find myself being online until 11 p.m., but I could never expect that of her. I want her to be with her kids and like taking them to ballet and stuff like that. But it's new, because everyone that I had spent the past like 4 years with was doing what I'm doing. So that's been very interesting too.
So staying on this communication, folks are following in the chat along with us, recognizing communication is key and communication style, right? So communication is how we interact, but also sometimes it is where we interact. And Melanie, we talked a lot about visibility the other day. Let's talk about visibility in a 3D world and visibility in a monolithic world like we are right now, but the importance in both ways and how we actually capture the importance of making sure we have visibility at the right time in the right way with the right people.
Yeah. So once again, I work in healthcare IT. So COVID hit us really hard. Being in healthcare, many of us had to be in person, but the majority of our team did go home to 100% remote experience. We are now in a hybrid, but that means that most of my team members only come in 1 day a week. So it's great. The work-life balance is great, but what we found is you lose that visibility with what we call the C-suite. So the vice presidents of the healthcare system, or even the directors that are here every single day. So the one thing is you have to be much more intentional. So if you're 100% remote, we do have a few on our team that live in other states and are 100% remote. And what they do is very intentional, and I see it. They join every committee that they can join or extracurricular so that they're in these networks, even though they're not in person. As women in IT, it's hard enough to rise up the ladder. As you get higher and higher, you do see more males in those roles. So visibility was my way of growing to be director in my position. I was always in the room and being a little bit more vocal. Well, now that we're on meetings, remember, you can only talk one person at a time on these virtual meetings. And it's very hard to get your voice heard. I don't know if you've ever been on these conversations, and sometimes you get steamrolled by some of the men in the room. So you may have heard your women colleagues say, "Excuse me, could you let her finish what she was saying?" If you're strong enough to do that. So that visibility is so very important in this new culture. This is where we're also using things like LinkedIn. So I'm a social media influencer. I do a lot of speaking about building your digital brand. And in the past, where we talk about, the folks that were the baby boomers or the traditionalists, they were built on reputation. That was word of mouth. So my grandfather lived to be into his 90s, and he always spoke to us as we were growing up about our reputation. And that's how his grandfather, built his store, and that's how he got his job at the post office and moved up, and my dad got his job. Now it's about brand. Reputation is basically the way people speak about you, what their vision is of you. As you build your digital brand through LinkedIn, through social media, you're showing others, this is who I am. This is what I bring to the table. So between the culmination of the LinkedIn profile, which is now kind of your digital resume, having your input there, adding your value there, you actually get recognition from the folks in your organization. Many leaders at the C-level are on LinkedIn. And whether you are in an entry-level position in an organization, you can build yourself to be whatever you want it to be. You can bring your volunteer work into that scope. I mean, I bring my farming into it, whatever the case may be. But I think that hybrid is the way it's going to go. We do bring people in the office, but don't bring them in the office just to turn on the computer and do your Teams meetings here in the office. That's ridiculous. So the 1 day a week that our folks are here as a director, our teams have to go into conference rooms. We have walls that you can write on. They throw things on the wall. It's not as productive as the days that they work from home, but it's a different type of productive. They're engaging with each other. You see innovation. They're putting together some great ideas here for 2023, building an escape room for team members to learn about cybersecurity with hands-on kind of fun things. I do have a very, very millennial-based team, and everyone has to remember, the millennials don't want bosses. They're looking for coaches. And if you're not ready to transition as a leader, you might want to find a different role in life because you're not going to make it. 2025, we're looking at 75% of the workforce being millennial or younger. So whether we like it or not, I was born in 1976. I am close enough to them that I'm trying to learn their style and engage them the way they want to be engaged. So do DISC assessments. DISC assessments are pretty much a way to have your whole team, regardless of what generation you're in, how do you like to be communicated with? It's worth the money. It's got great ROI, but that's pretty much my answer to that. Thank you so much, Michelle.
Yeah, and no, 100%, that whole thing about, again, in taking advantage of the workplace and understanding. I've been involved in numerous of the teams that I've led and I have worked with. We have done those types of exercises, and it's incredible to learn, depending whatever style you do, DISC, or there's a whole bunch of different Myers-Briggs, right? You're a north, you're a south, you're an east, you're a west, you're outgoing, you're not. Like, you learn things about people based upon their pure authenticity and their competencies that you would not otherwise understand. And then it totally changes the dynamic of how you can interact with them. And frankly, opens up a world of opportunity on teamwork that you might not be able to accomplish otherwise. And so looking to those tools, those objective tools, as a way to bring a team along is definitely a best practice we should try to capture. And if anybody, is looking for some of those opportunities, please reach out and maybe we can connect you with some of those. Gale, I want to jump back for a minute. It's so funny because we're kind of sharing where we are in our generations. I am literally the cusper. I am 64, and some say 64, 65 is that, shift between the two generations. And it's so funny because when we talk about the folks who are what the ideals and the vision of those two generations are, I relate on both ends. And it's so funny because I feel it. But when I look back now, and I have millennial kids, and I deal with millennials in the workforce all the time, and I mentor millennials, and I learn so much from the generations that are coming up behind me, because this is a tech conference, right? I am not, a tech savvy person. I'm an attorney by trade. I was a liberal arts person. I'm all about, government, civic opportunity, all those social sciences, math and pure science were on the other end of my equation. And yet I learned so much from the next generation coming up. I consider a relationship, a mentor-mentee relationship, as a two-way street. Gale, as someone who, and I know you've mentored incredible, many women through the course of your career. What do you learn from the generation coming up, and how does that empower you and really shape you to help then others in your space?
It's a great question. And of course, working in higher ed, I've had the chance to interact with many young people. My sweet spot was adult learners, but young adult learners. They're done with undergraduate, going on for graduate, or they're part-time, but they're working and they want to work. So I've learned so much, but I do have, my PhD is in political psychology. So I always look at the underlying, not psychiatry kind of things, but social psychology and group dynamic issues. I can tell you that for me, there are two major concepts that I've learned and that I put in, that I have applied. And I think those who have worked with me and those who I've always treated as colleagues as opposed to boss, subordinate. I've learned that you know that everyone has strengths and weaknesses. And if you play to those strengths and have someone else on your team who overcomes a weakness team member one has, but has a strength that's also needed, you're going to get the best from your team. But from a psychological point of view, there are two kind of concepts to think about. It's about trust and how you can generate trust across the generations, knowing they have different motivations, different background, different life experiences, but there are ways of generating trust. So we can talk about that, and it would be great to hear people who are younger than me on this panel and our participants. But the other concept really has to do with some of the newest social psychology theories that are talking about what is the underlying basis of trust that leads to motivation to be the most productive in whatever you're doing. And usually three things are talked about: a feeling of autonomy, a feeling of relatedness, and a feeling of competence. And again, these three are kind of overlapping and connected. And I can talk a little bit more about that, but let's turn it over to people of different ages than me. So.
But great, great points. So this whole concept of trust. So this comes now back to culture, right? Mm-hmm. Communication is key. Culture is key. I see a theme in C's coming around here, right? Yes. We said this going into at the beginning of COVID. And again, when I talk to my companies, any company that had a good culture going in, one that was built on trust and good communication, did well when everybody went home. Those that didn't have a sense of trust in the workforce and poor communication faltered bad. Right. And along the way, they actually, I think, even lost more faith and trust by their workforce. And then people started to peel off, and you could just see the disintegration happen. When we talk about a trust environment, right, the whole idea of a flat organization, empowering every person to be a decision maker or leader from their seat, whether you're sitting at the front, welcoming people into the building, or you're sitting up at the top of the C-suite, right? Ensuring that every person, when you empower them, has the tools they need to do their job. And then empower them to do their job. But what they owe you back is they then need to agree to be held accountable. Right? If you've created trust, if you've given them the tools and you've empowered them, they now need to be accountable. And look, if you trip and fall, we dust you off, we pull you up, right? We figure what happened and we repeat and we go through and we figure it out and we make it better next time around. Niki, how would you define, and I'm going to go around with this because I think we talk about culture, and to me, culture is the success of the workforce. Culture is at the key. How would you define success in the workplace and the importance of culture? And what are you looking for in the cultural fit?
That's a big question. For me personally, when I was interviewing, especially the second time around where I felt like I had more control over deciding where I wanted to work and I wasn't just looking for a job out of the pandemic and graduating, I actively pursued companies that had a deliberate diversity, equity, and inclusion plan and stood by that because that was something important to me in college and just growing up in a very mixed community. But I think what's defined a successful cultural corporate environment, especially because both of my jobs were incredibly great culturally, I would say, is that everyone feels like they have a place or a piece in the puzzle. I have not felt like I'm just a person doing a task. I understand the impact of the work that I'm doing. And that's been really important to me because I think that, especially at my age, I don't really know what the future looks like. I don't know what I want to achieve in my career, but at least I know that the work that I'm doing day to day has some sort of impact in the grand scheme of things. So that's been incredibly important for me.
Great point. And we talk about this all the time that we all have. So I love, some folks said culture and trust each strategy, for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And it's so true at the heart. But when we talk about strategy, every single person in the organization needs to understand that when they wake up and put their boots on the ground every day, how are they moving strategy? How are they moving mission? How are they moving vision, right? And when those things are clear, that's what impassions us. That's what gets us excited about our work. And that's when we're the most productive that we can be. Right. Melanie, there was a thought about sharing better in this more flat world, right? You talked before about intentionality for visibility and joining committees, et cetera. Have you found any particular good best practices you can share for continuing to gain visibility in the hybrid environment, especially when you're on things like Zoom calls?
Yep, absolutely. So one of the things that we encourage our team is to turn their cameras on. I know it's hard, and I know, we work from home, we kind of jump out of bed and kind of put something on and we're like, oh, we don't have to really dress up anymore. When I work from home, which is rare, I do dress up. I still get up, and at least from the waist up, I look very presentable. I fix my hair, I put on my makeup, and I turn on that camera. And there are so many things that are missed with the communication that's through emails and through text messages and pictureless Zoom calls. I think that we forget that when you see people nodding their heads in agreement, they may not be speaking, right? Because we can only speak as once. I also use the chat. So as I'm doing today during the panel, I'm adding my comments into the chat. I'm constantly engaging. If somebody puts something into the chat, I like it. Sometimes leaders, you can tease a little bit. It's interesting, as Niki said before, it's really nice. The millennials have brought this light energy. And I think that it's okay to be a little fun with each other, even on executive calls. We put little jokes. So we're on Microsoft Teams, and they have these little moving things and little funny things. If it's someone's birthday, we shoot something in. So the meeting's going on, but there's energy in that sidebar. Absolutely. And it's almost like the water cooler conversations. Use the first few minutes of that meeting to get to know people. I always show up a little bit early, right? So, hey, I might get caught into a Teams meeting with another VP, and I'm like, hey, I saw on LinkedIn, you posted a la-di-da. And then what you do is you have a little conversation. You have an opportunity for that water cooler talk or that elevator pitch, right? At the beginning of the meetings. At the end, everybody runs. But these are little tips and tricks just to get that visibility. And really. And the one thing is, if everyone has their camera off, turn your off. It's almost like a little faux pas for everyone to see your like enormous face. I know that's weird, but you have to kind of learn. I know Nikki's laughing because you've seen that, right? Everyone has to learn sort of the new rules of the trade here. But absolutely, you know, you can do it. We have business leadership groups here at Atlantic Health, and it's wonderful because there you're getting into one-on-one mentoring, right? So mentoring with high-level folks at your organization. So take it a step further, join those things, because outside of the regular work, you're networking with higher levels at your company, and they're getting to know you, your authentic self. So those are kind of my suggestions to add.
Great points, Melanie. And, you know, I would just add that, you know, setting the expectations for the meeting at the beginning, you know, oftentimes when you go into a meeting in a room, a 3D meeting, at the beginning of the meeting, people actually talk about, here are the expectations for this meeting, right? And you talk about, you want to have, you know, you want to be interactive and throw out your ideas and open Q&A, and we're going to take whiteboard, right? We'll do the same thing in a one-dimension meeting. When the meeting starts, say, inviting everyone to turn your cameras on, right? Please use the chat. Let's keep the momentum going. Let's high five. You know, et cetera, because it does create that sidebar. And one thing I want to say about cameras, and again, I lead my organization. I have told my staff, and when I get on meetings with people, I've said, I recognize, you know, we call it working from home. I recognize I've invaded your private space. Now, I've empowered you to work from home, but guess what? I brought the office into your private space. And I recognize that your private space is not potentially, right, you know, a cube in a building somewhere that has, you know, little statues and a chalkboard and all this other stuff. You might be sitting at your kitchen counter. You might be sitting in a laundry room or a garage because, you know, that's your situation. You're going to have kids in the background. You're going to have a dog. You're going to have a cat. You're going to have a noise. You're going to have your 89-year-old mother come through and give you a kiss once in a while. Okay. Guess what? Totally fine. This is how we understand each other as individuals. This is how we relate, right? You're not going to see me, Michelle, as the CEO. You're going to see me as Michelle, whose 89-year-old mother lives with her, whose husband's working in the other room, whose cat sits on her lap, right? Personalize, allow yourself, but setting the expectation at the beginning. And you know what, if you're not leading the meeting, but you know someone who is, you have the opportunity to influence your organization and your team and your group. Share some ideas and say, hey, you know what? We just had this great discussion today, and we talked about the idea of setting expectations on our calls and taking down the temperature and making a little bit more interactive and personal. And I bet you people will listen to you. Be a decision maker and be empowered from your spot and share the things you've learned and heard today. And then all together, I think that we can make this environment one where we can all, you know, prosper and continue to be productive. We have about 1 minute, and I just want to go real quick around. Gale, any last sentiment you want to share?
Yes, what you've just said, so important. There is a lot that translate from what higher ed had to do for professors to really be effective in fully remote classrooms. And it was all about their showing emotion, vulnerability, sharing with their students, so it motivates them. And just a brief word, because we have a minute, there are some really interesting developments happening by what's called telepresence. You may remember it's robots that are for those in the office, those remote can come in through a robot that has a screen with the face, and it makes a difference in how it all works together. That's my 2 cents there. Telepresence.
Thanks, Gale. Thanks, Gale. Nikki, last word.
I just want to thank you all. It's been really insightful to hear your experiences. My network is pretty small because I talk to like my direct team, and then I'm on a few calls because I'm still a small person in a really big company, but it's just been so eye-opening. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Melanie?
I just want to thank everyone, and just a reminder to leaders out there, with the multi-generations, great opportunity to take generations and mix them together. Take your millennials, hook them up with your baby boomers, and you will be surprised. They both learn from each other, so keep it going.
Fantastic. Well, it's been great. I encourage everyone, please go look in the chat. There are awesome tips and there are some links. This was a really engaged discussion in the chat. Don't miss it. Go and capture all the ideas that are in the chat. Elaine, back to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Michelle, Nikki, Gale, Melanie. Great discussion. And Nikki, thank you. You were the one on one of our advisory board meetings that suggested this topic. So for a young person, don't sell yourself short. You're already ahead of some of your peers, I'm sure.